You're listening to a Least Important Things miniseries. Dear listener, your mission, if you choose to accept it, is to rewatch every Mission Impossible movie with Luke Ferris and Mike Wynne. Together, you'll investigate everything from Tom Cruise's running stride to the legacy of this spy action franchise. Good luck. This podcast will self-destruct in 30 seconds. Welcome to Podcast Impossible, a special rewatch miniseries for Least Important Things, where we accept the mission of watching every Mission Impossible movie leading up to the 7th installment of the series. Our task is to investigate the improbable influence of this franchise on culture, cinema, and Tom Cruise's legacy. With me, of course, is my Luther to my Ethan, my good friend, Michael Wynne. Welcome.
Howdy. Yeah, welcome. Welcome indeed. I'm happy to be here.
So for folks that maybe haven't listened to us talk in this format, maybe they just joined Least Important Things, the family, the community, and have heard more of the essay style episodes. We also did a podcast called Jurassic Pod, which is on a different stream. It's a different feed you can listen to right now if you want to. And it's more of a walkthrough rewatch podcast where we go beat by beat through the movie, where we talk about the bigger themes of the films, the legacy, etc. So it's a little bit different style. If you want to hear more of us, you can go to Jurassic Pod, but we're going to have this series on the Least Important feed. So stay tuned, stay subscribed, all those great things. Mike, if the listeners maybe have not heard about you, heard your beautiful voice, your beautiful thoughts, how would you like to introduce yourself? What would be your elevator pitch for yourself?
I'm just a lover of cinema. Obviously, you and I have been friends for many, many years, and we have a shared love of the media and of cinema, and just kind of the things in our society that are just so looked over, but so central and important to like what makes us like get up in the morning and keep going. So,
and I think getting up in the morning is what Mission Impossible is all about. And running. Why? Yes. Actually, I went for a run today and I was thinking about Mission Impossible because we just watched the film. Ironically, listeners, we're recording this the day after we both watched it. We aren't in the same city. We're not in the same area. We did not watch it together, which we've done in the past. Yeah. But Mike, tell the listeners what actually happened while we were preparing for this podcast.
Yeah. So we had endeavored to watch the movies and said that we needed to, obviously rewatch the movies before we recorded. So you sent me a message and you said, "Hey, are we still good to record tonight?" I said, yes. Absolutely. I have to watch the movie tonight. That was yesterday. Okay. And you said, "Yeah, me too." So later on, I've got stuff I got to get done when I get home from work. Right. So I'm getting that stuff done. And I'm like, okay, finally I can get around to this movie. I start watching the movie. I get a text from you saying, "Hey, here's, just some observations from the movie." I whatever. I'm just watching it with Shannon. Well, it's pretty obvious to me based on the messages I'm getting from you, like where you are in the movie. And it's so interesting because I'm like, yeah, I just finished watching that. So later on, I finish up and I get a text from you saying, "I just finished." How far behind was I? I had finished 5 minutes before you had. So without us coordinating watching the movies at the same time, we had just set up to watch the movies at nearly the exact same time.
Without even planning. That's how professional this podcast is. Without even trying, we're in sync the whole time. I mean, that is, yes. We'll talk about a mission, a successful mission. I mean, that is beautiful. I think maybe we could just like have AI transcribe our text thread and then we wouldn't have to even do anything.
It's funny you mentioned that because I didn't share this with you, but I actually went to the chat GPT and asked them to write a synopsis of Jurassic Pod. And the next time we record, I should read it because it's just funny. It obviously has never listened to our podcast and is just using contextual clues, but it was just funny how how nearly spot on it was.
Oh boy. Oh boy. But we're real, listeners. We're real. We're humans. We're flesh and blood. No AI is going to take us away from adoring the Tom Cruise franchise of Mission Impossible. All right. Let's get into it because we have a lot to cover in this first Mission Impossible. If you didn't hear it in the intro, we are rewatching every single Mission Impossible leading up to the 7th movie. So once a month, we will be watching a new installment of Mission Impossible. Of course, we have to start January. The first one is the original Mission Impossible. And this film opened in 1997, but it's a reboot, which a lot of people don't know. It's a reboot of a television series. So we're going to get into some specifics of it. But before we dive in, Mike, is there anything you'd like to share about your experience with Mission Impossible, your walk with Mission Impossible, how you've experienced it in your life? Because I don't want to just dive into the movie. I want to get your experience with the franchise.
So it's one of my all-time favorite franchises. I just think that the movies are really entertaining. And in a lot of cases, they're really well done. And most of the time, they're not very campy for the most part. And so the first movie came out in 96 and I was born in 92. So I was far too young to enjoy it when it first came out. So my first experience was really Mission Impossible 3. And so I remember watching that and I remember liking it. But then, to be honest, it just kind of existed for me. The franchise that just sort of existed in the background. When I got into college, and I think Rogue Nation or Ghost Protocol came out, I was like really excited to go see it. So I thought, well, to be honest, I really only seen 3, maybe 4. I don't know that I've really ever seen the movies. So I went back, and in college, I actually watched all the movies and became a huge fan of the franchise. And I think last year, Shannon, my wife, and I sat down and did, I think inside of a month, we watched all of the movies back to back to back to back. And then, so she's actually unofficially on the ride with us because she has said that she wants me to prioritize watching them with her as we're going through this. Beautiful. So she is also a big Mission Impossible fan.
If you aren't a listener of Jurassic Pod, you would know Shannon if you were, but she's an amazing person. And she was a guest on the Jurassic World episode of the Jurassic Pod podcast. And maybe she will be on a future episode, maybe with my wife. My wife is not as much of a Impossible head, but she was sitting in the same room reading a book while the movie was on. So yeah, that's a win.
I mean, yeah, I feel like that's a win. Shannon does that for most things for me.
For my Impossible experience, it goes back to probably in a similar vein where too young to see the first one in theaters and the second one in theaters. Third one in theaters, big mark for me. But the first and second one were perennial TV movies. My dad grew up watching the Mission Impossible TV show. So he was a fan of the franchise. So it was always on TV. So we watched it in different chunks and segments. But I think for me, Mission Impossible 2 was part of my package deal of 90s action movies, so that my brother and I would watch all the time. So it's grouped in with all the great, action and bad action movies of the time. But then, like you, I think probably once, I don't know what we want to call it, but the Mission Impossible Renaissance happened. You could argue, maybe we'll debate this, between Mission Impossible 3 and 4. I got back into it like a lot of Americans, and it was something that you knew you were going to get a quality film, fun action film. And now it's become part of the Tom Cruise zeitgeist. And we'll get into Tom Cruise, the production, all that good stuff. But just one other thing. So there is a big time gap between Mission Impossible 3 and Ghost Protocol, which is the 4th one. And to your point, I think that because of the success of Ghost Protocol was a hugely, hugely popular and commercially successful movie. And we'll talk more about that when we watch it. But that really catapulted this film franchise from just like a 3-movie franchise to like a mega
film franchise that rivals the Jurassic Park franchise. It rivals honestly, it rivals the Avengers and then the Marvel Cinematic Universe, just not in volume, but in terms of like the hype and like it that comes with the releases. So Ghost Protocol that came out in 2011, that's the movie that I would say really was the catalyst behind my viewership.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people too. And maybe we'll talk about that as we go through this. One of the big questions I have, and let's not answer it right now, is, and I've thought about this a lot, and I might do an entire Least Important Things essay episode about this, but if we can find a definitive answer, is Mission Impossible the American James Bond franchise? So think about that. Listeners, think about that. I don't know if we can prove it. There's obviously discrepancies. One comes from books, one comes from a TV series, but just think about it, because it's becoming that way where Tom Cruise coming out with a new Mission Impossible is the hype is getting to the level of a new Bond movie. Maybe not. Maybe I'm going a little too far on our mission. But let's get into the specifics. Actually, you know what? One thing before we start, I thought about this, and I've been thinking about this a lot. How funny would it be if we went through this, we did our opener, and then this entire podcast miniseries was about Kim Possible, the television show?
That is an extremely underrated concept. That's awesome. Why aren't we doing that, actually?
I think we should just scrap the whole thing, go straight into Kim Possible.
Kim Possible, also a feature film franchise. I think there are multiple Kim Possible movies.
Well, did they do a live action one of it? Because there's they did a movie of the cartoon, but
I'm looking it up. So they have there are 3 Kim Possible movies. So it's a true franchise. A Stitch in Time, or I'm sorry, A Sitch in Time.
Oh, Sitch, yeah.
Came out in 2003. Was followed with the sequel So the Drama in 2005. And then, Luke, thank you, a live action Kim Possible the movie, 2019. I don't want to take anything away from these films, so we will not discuss what their Rotten Tomato scores or box office were.
Maybe that'll be an extra, is a full Kim Possible deep dive. But let's get into the one that started it all, is Mission Impossible. Mike, I've got a lot of great factoids for you. So will you bear with me as I set the scene for us?
Give it to me.
All right. Mission Impossible opened Memorial Day weekend in 1997. That weekend, you could have seen movies like Twister, Flipper, or The Craft. It would gross $75 million in its first 6 days, surpassing the previous record holder. Can you guess it? With the previous record holder for weekend opening?
Weekend opening?
Or first 6 days. First 6 days.
Oh, Titanic was 97, so never mind. 6 days, Ben-Hur.
Jurassic Park.
I should have really known that.
There's a lot of ties there. Just wait. And it grossed over $180 million. If you adjust that for inflation, it's still the highest grossing Mission Impossible film. It cost $64 million to make and was shot in London at Pinewood Studios, Scotland, and on location in Prague. And here's the team. It was directed by Brian De Palma, who directed Scarface, The Untouchables, Dressed to Kill, and Carrie. He's a member of the new Hollywood generation, which includes his buddies George Lucas, Steven Spielberg, and Francis Ford Coppola. So big auteur director that they got to film this movie. It was produced by Cruise Wagner Productions. And yes, of course, that is Tom Cruise and Paula Wagner. And it was their first production. There's a reason why this franchise still exists, because this was the first time where Cruise went from movie star to movie mogul. Cinematography by Stephen H. Burham, who did Body Double, The Untouchables, Carlito Way, all Brian De Palma films. So he's a Brian De Palma stand by. He's one of the starters for Brian De Palma. He brought in the big guns. It's edited by Paul Hirsch. Now, you may not know that name, but Paul Hirsch edited movies such as Carrie, Star Wars, The Empire Strikes Back, and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And then music was done by Danny Elfman, who did Batman and Beetlejuice. It was written by David Koepp. And if you listen to Jurassic Pod, you know that David Koepp helped write the screenplay for Jurassic Park and Carlito's Way. So there's a lot of cross-pollination between that generation, between De Palma, Spielberg, Lucas. Steven Zalian also helped write it. He did Schindler's List, Clear and Present Danger, which is a great 90s action movie. That's part of I would say, the cornucopia of 90s action movies and 80s action movies that I consumed as a kid. Robert Towne also helped write it. He did Crimson Tide, The Firm, so another Cruise film. And he did an episode of The Man from U.N.C.L.E., which was a very similar spy TV show in the 60s. The film stars Tom Cruise as Ethan Hunt, John Voight as Jim Phelps, Emmanuel Beret as Claire Phelps, Ving Rhames as Luther Stickle. I didn't even know that was his last name. Henry Scherzy as Eugene Kittredge, Sean Reno as Franz Krieger, Kristen Scott Thomas as Sarah Davies, and Emilio Estevez as Jack Harmon. Here's some interesting facts. Not only is this the only film in the franchise where Ethan Hunt doesn't fire a gun, it's the only one not to have shootouts or gunfights. Huge part of the film. That's really interesting. Tom Cruise deferred his $20 million fee for a percentage of the box office takings, which was a good move. And of course, he was a fan of the original series. That's part of the reason why he wanted to produce it. Jim Phelps is the only character from the original series, we'll talk about that, to appear in this movie. One of the code names for the knock list is Maverick, which is a reference to, of course, Tom Cruise's role in Top Gun. This was one of the first big movies to be filmed in Prague after its freedom from communism. Freedom from communism, that's IMDb's language, not mine, in 1989. And I wanted to pull this. I looked up the New York Times review for this opening weekend. So this is from May 28th. And this is the quote from Sherry Lansing, who is a chairman and chief executive at Paramount. So this is her quote in the article. No one could have ever dreamed the numbers we're getting. Also, Tom Cruise is a major movie star, arguably the greatest draw there is. And then this is the writer for the New York Times article. The movie's success means that Mr. Cruise, who produced the film with his partner Paula Wagner, will probably turn Mission Impossible into its own franchise and make sequels. Very, very interesting premonition into what is to come. I feel like you could have said no one could have dreamed the numbers we were getting. Also, Tom Cruise is a major movie star, arguably the biggest draw there is. Sherry Lansing could have said that this past summer about Maverick, and it would have been the exact same quote. I doubt she's still at Paramount. So that is all of our facts, factoids. That is the plan about Mission Impossible. Please fact check at your own discretion.
As you were going through that, I was looking at where this was in Tom Cruise's career. So it comes after, his roles in movies like The Firm and A Few Good Men, and obviously Top Gun, Cocktail, Days of Thunder, Rain Man. So
I mean huge star.
Up to that point. But I don't know this movie, his filmography after this movie is just like, it may be only rivaled by Tom Hanks in terms of their filmographies. It's insane. Not necessarily box office, because I think box office Cruise hasn't beat, but in terms of the notoriety and reputation as an actor they have for the roles they take.
It's wild because we're talking about a film that came out almost 30 years ago. I'm pulling quotes from the New York Times article, And it's pretty much the exact same thing you would describe Tom Cruise now. The longevity is absurd. We'll continue to talk about it. We'll talk about the stunts. We'll talk about the running. We'll talk about the production. We'll talk about all those things that come with Tom Cruise.
We also just have to talk about maybe it's just not okay that he's both Ethan Hunt and Jack Reacher.
That's
like, that's not fair, right?
It's not really fair. But it's just crazy watching this film and just knowing that at that time he was the hot star, and to think about what happened this past year, what happened in 2022 with Maverick, and that he did the exact same thing. Now, it was a sequel, but he did the exact same thing almost 30 years later, where he made a movie that maybe wasn't expected to do amazing and it totally overperformed. Like, just incredible longevity of making films. It's a beautiful thing.
Yep. Agreed.
All right. So if you haven't listened to Jurassic Pod, we go note for note through the film. I hope you've watched it before we've talked about it. If you haven't, hopefully it will remind you to watch ahead of time. So before the February episode comes out, watch MI2.
I would say too, to anybody listening to this that hasn't watched the movies but has watched and listened to our Jurassic content, you can listen to people talk about Jurassic Park without spoiling the movie. I don't think that's true for the Mission Impossible franchise. So if you want to not have the Mission Impossible franchise spoiled for you, not that there's these crazy plot twists, but certainly in the first movie there are, it may be worth watching the movies and then coming to the podcast, as opposed to, I feel like with Jurassic Pod, you could do either or.
Yeah. So if you're any of Mike's coworkers who I know are big fans of Jurassic Pod, he works for a global company. So that's a big group of people. That's not like two people. If you haven't seen the first Mission Impossible, or you haven't seen it in 20 years, stop now, watch the movie, come back to us on your commute, and you will be ready to go. Okay. So starting out, a lot of Prague. I talked about Prague as being a very rare place where they hadn't filmed any movies. Now, I mean, they filmed a ton of movies there, but it's one of my favorite parts about this first movie is the tone, the visuals. But we start out in Kiev, quote unquote. This is a cold open. Let's follow the cold opens throughout the franchise as we move along. But this is I think from the TV show, this is a very old school way to open up the movie. It's the mask. It's the first time we see the mask. They're essentially trying to get information from this guy. They're creating a scenario where this guy thinks he's in a certain situation. He might have killed this woman, and they're getting information. This comes up throughout the franchise, like where they literally have a set for this guy to trick him to pulling information. Emilio Estevez, just starting us off. I mean, also at that point, people don't realize he was a huge star. So it's not just like, oh, it's the Tom Cruise show. I mean, Emilio Estevez still was a big star.
Yeah. Also, John Voight was a big star.
Huge star.
He hasn't come into the movie yet, but John Voight was a big star at the time too.
Because the tone of this opening scene is very campy. It's very television show. He rips the mask off. It's not like the rest of the movie, in my opinion. Like it's fun, it's exciting, but it feels like it could have been in the television show, and I feel like that's probably what they were going for.
I felt that way too about the scene in Prague when they're going over the plan for how to get the knock list. It just kind of really felt like the pacing of it really felt like this just feels like it's a TV show right now.
It was very procedural, which is why it was a good TV show, because you could set up, hey, this is our team. That was what we're trying to do. We're trying to get this information out of this guy. It worked really well. So the opening sequence is not shot for shot for the television show, but very inspired by the television show. It also gives us clues of the rest of the movie, which I like in a cold open. That kind of teases the rest of the movie. But rewatching it in a modern lens, it's like, it reminded me of actually Alias. Like, which Alias was for, I think Alias premiered in 2001, which is one of my favorite TV shows. But it was very much felt like the opening of Alias, which, if you know anything about Alias was the creator of the showrunner of Alias did Mission Impossible 3. So just very fascinating. They keep the old logo, which I think is interesting. The logo is very, very similar to the television logo. Just the colors have changed. They just, and the text is more streamlined. So we have this opening scene with John Voight on the airplane, and we'll see that at the end. One of the first instances where we see kind of the technology of this movie, which it's not outdated, but it's almost like they do this in the James Bond movies where they predict what's happening, because essentially he has an iPad, right?
Yes.
Kind of. Yeah.
I mean, I joked that the longevity of this film franchise is really measured not by its box office and like success across generations, but by the technology that's used to deliver the mission statement. And here, I mean, it looks like John Voight's character is given what looks like an 8-track or a Super Nintendo cartridge. And he's like, and he like plugs it in, and now he's got like this like remote control. It's just so funny to me.
And again, like you said, this is delivering the very famous line of "this message will self-destruct," which comes from the TV show. And I love how he masks the self-destruct of the tape is by starting to smoke. Again, very, very different, very, very different time of air travel. So he has a lot of leg room. I'm sure he's in first class, but he's able to smoke as well. I don't see Maverick. Looking at it now, but Maverick is on the knock list, so we're gonna have to look out for that as we're looking at the screenshots. I didn't see it in there, but this is basically setting up the idea that, which maybe it happened before the Mission Impossible, but it's very classic spy movie. There's a list of operatives that can be pulled via file, floppy disk, whatever it is, but it's about list of operatives that could compromise their undercoverness, and that's kind of the plot of the movie, if I could understand. We meet the IMF agents. They're, you know what that I noticed in this opening scene, we talked about a procedural, but they seem like a really great team. Did you get that vibe?
Yeah, I did, because you know what they do is at the end of going over the mission brief, right? Tom Cruise's character, Ethan Hunt, starts criticizing the type of coffee. And then there's like this camaraderie. It's like, well, it can't be worse than the stuff that we had in Kiev, which is where they were in the opening scene for a different mission. So it's just so funny that like these guys obviously are very close. Like they've worked together on a lot. They know each other to the point where they're willing to just criticize each other's ability to make a cup of coffee.
This just reminds me of the teams I had working at a big corporation. I'm sure you feel like where like this is the type of conversations you have in the workplace after like, okay, we finished the meeting, we know what we're doing, and then like, let's talk about the coffee. Like it's a very corporate America business thing. And
it fits because the coffee in every corporate office is always terrible. In fact, where I work, we say that the coffee is appropriately priced because it's free and it belongs in the garbage.
Yes. Good times. This movie, like I rewatching it again, it was like, wow, they really want you to kind of like feel comfortable, like you're watching a TV show, because you're like, all right, I'm going to get to know these people for the rest of this, like the show. They're very comfortable. I kind of like that. You kind of like them all. There's no like a-hole. There's no like, everyone's very attractive and young and engaging.
No, they're not. No. So let's stop there because John Voight is not young and attractive.
He's the team leader besides John Voight.
But this is I guess my first quote unquote issue with the movie is it's utterly unconvincing to me that Emmanuel Beirut is married to John Voight in this movie. She is young, attractive. Frankly, she's gorgeous.
Gorgeous.
And he is not. And and I understand like Hollywood will like take an older actor and a younger actor and like pair them together. And in reality, like these two actors are 25 years apart in age, but because it's John Voight, it actually seems like it's 50 years apart in age.
Yes. It seems like grandfather-esque age. Now, a lot of people may know this already, but they had scenes cut that basically set up the idea that there was a love triangle between the three. So if you watch the movie and you see the scenes with Claire and Ethan, it's very, very charged, very sexual, very like angsty. It's because they had a whole part written about like making it very clear that there was a love triangle happening, but they cut that out. So that's probably part of it where you're like, it's confusing because you're like, how's this relationship working? And I think that's a lot of it, but it also makes it interesting knowing that and rewatching it. You're like, oh, it explains a lot. Okay. So they go into the embassy. Essentially they're trying to figure out if there's a mole in the embassy that's trying to steal this list and sell it. So we get the first person of Tom Cruise. Ironically enough, Tom Cruise is dressed up as a senator from Virginia. He played the senator from Virginia in the clip. So it matched really, really well. Interesting thing that we'll have to look at in the future. I like the first person viewpoint of this whole setup. Like it's really interesting. You see Tom Cruise, Ethan Hunt's perspective under the mask, and you kind of see the whole setup. Yep. My question for you, rewatching it again, did you notice the waiter looking at the other operative?
No. I mean, I know it's part of the movie, but I never never look for it. Yeah, right there. Yeah. I noticed it, but then I thought it was a gaffe. I thought it was just an extra gaffe, which is interesting. But it was the first time I noticed it in real time, and maybe it was just me remembering it. So they targeted the guy. Hey, this is our guy. We got to get him. Then Cruise and Kristen Scott Thomas, who I love. She's in for weddings and a funeral and a ton of stuff. They basically are going to go and use Google Glasses to film the guy taking the floppy disk. I have to say, floppy disk tension is the best kind of tension. Like bring back floppy disks because they are the best things ever. Like there's no cloud storage in this. Like they can't upload anything. Like this whole movie, like it's so basic internet. Like uploading something is like there's tension. Like Emilio Estevez has to upload. Basically, it's like uploading to Google Drive, like that she works at the embassy. It's beautiful. I thought to myself watching this, I'm like, I mean, a floppy disk holds like no data.
Nothing. So like one Word document.
Yeah. Like what really are these criminals after?
It's an Excel file of
all these names. Yeah. Right.
It's literally one Excel file.
Right. Yes.
It's so good. It's just early internet movies make me so happy because they're so simple and no one knows really how it works. Like I don't get how Jim's able to override the elevator in this. Like how would he be able to override the elevator?
He plugged in, didn't you see? He's like plugged into the control panel. There's a very short, like 1 second clip of
wirelessly. How is he plugged in? How can he be in the safe house and plugged into the system at the embassy?
Because what's his face? I don't remember the character's
Emilio
name.
Estevez.
Yeah, he's on
Jack
top.
Harmon.
Yeah, he's on the top of the elevator, and I don't know, Luke, movie magic.
Does he have a it's just fascinating to me. I just love it. I love it. Apple Watches are also in this movie.
Yes. Yeah.
Apple Watches play a big part, where basically it's connected to the Google Glass and they can see it. So ahead of its time in that way. But it's very interesting to see, like, oh, yep, Apple Watches are a thing now that is part of our lives. But Steve Jobs was a little behind the ball. Mission Impossible was way ahead.
Behind the ball. Yeah. Mission Impossible had this down pat. Coming up to the scene here where Emilio Estevez's character gets brutally murdered in the elevator shaft by an elevator. Can I just say that I remember when the first time I watched this, Jon Voight's character's reaction is extremely telling to me. I just don't see, spoiler alert, but Jon Voight is the bad guy. I definitely remember first time watching this thinking either this is really bad acting, or this guy is clearly the villain.
It's great. And they emphasize the chair tip, which I don't know why, but it's actually great acting in that way. This Emilio Estevez kill they cut right before the spike goes in his mouth, but it's like they literally could have done 1 or 2 frames more and it would have been pretty brutal.
That would have been the R rating right there.
Yeah, they were close. This sequence is so good because you have Ethan. He's kind of figuring out. He has very much that young Tom Cruise foolishness, where he thinks he can complete the mission. It's very Maverick, and it's
really Maverick. He has a line here as they're being told to abort the mission because it's not going to plan. He has a line here where he's being told to abort, and he says, "I wrote this down." He does this little eyebrow raise as he says, we are going to recover that disc. You understand me? And as he says, right before he says, "You understand me," he does a little eyebrow raise, right? Coming up here. And I just thought this is so Tom Cruise to be like the ultra macho, like hero, like, "Do you understand me?" kind of thing.
Understand me. So. Yeah. It's so Tom Cruise and it works really well. I love the framing and the cinematography and just the pacing of this scene. Very, very clearly where everyone is, just the way they shot it, with the bridge and kind of the backside of the river. De Palma is a fantastic director, and it really shows in this first one of setting kind of that tension. A lot of De Palma movies, he does more, thriller into some kind of horror genres, and he's very, very good at setting kind of the tension and letting the tension build. It's what stands this first one out is there's a lot more tension. We talked about that. There's really no guns in this movie. There's no shootouts. It's a lot of this tension in the setting of Prague, kind of the dampness, the coldness. I love it. Now we enter the first of many Tom Cruise running in the Mission Impossible franchise. I texted you about how difficult it was to keep up. I've got him running to the bridge, running from the bridge, running to the phone booth, running to Sarah, then running to the phone booth, saying, "My team is dead," which is great. Which is a great line, just screaming it in.
My team is dead. My team is dead.
Dead. So good. And then he runs. Okay, then we go to the restaurant scene. And if I'm getting too focused on the runs, just let me know.
No, I think there's not enough focus on the runs.
So then he gets, so basically essentially his team dies. Everyone goes down. It's very tense. Such a good scene. Then he calls his kind of the CIA operative, the higher up, and basically it was like, okay, let's meet at our place, which is a restaurant that has a aquarium on the top of it. The character of Kittredge is one of my favorite
Henry
characters.
Czerny.
Henry Czerny, who plays Kittredge, is fantastic as not the full antagonist, because we realize that he's
a
not
good red herring.
He's a red herring. We kind of think he set this whole up. Essentially, their whole mission was to see if there was a mole within their IMF team.
If this movie was directed and written by Wes Craven, this character's name would not be Kittredge, it would be Red Harrington.
Yes, it would be Red Harrington. He is also, he's a Canadian actor, and I did hear a couple Canadian slips, but he is, I would say a similar role, but a very similar role in Clear and Present Danger, which was also written by Steven Zalian. So, and he plays almost the exact same character in Clear and Present Danger. He's essentially kind of the bureaucrat, intelligence officer, following the rules, getting in the way of our hero. And he plays the same character. He's amazing. This aquarium seems so good. We have all these Dutch angles. If you don't know what a Dutch angle is, it's essentially you're looking at somebody, and in this case, it's usually lower than their face, and the camera's tilted as an angle. Essentially, it helps build tension. And they're going back and forth. Ethan's figuring out what's going on. He's essentially going to be framed / targeted as the mole. And this is where we get our first Tom Cruise full stunt spectacular. He uses the gum that was kind of hinted at the beginning of the movie. What was that gum we had when we were kids, like the zebra gum? Do you remember that?
Yeah, that's kind of what it looks like.
Essentially a zebra gum that is a C4 explosive, and he blows up the aquarium that's above their table, and that's how he gets away. Tom Cruise, this was kind of his first big out of the franchise. This is his first. Tom Cruise did the stunt. He does the stunt where he jumps out of the restaurant, and then we get another running, which is run number 5 in my count. And I'm counting a run as point to point. So this is his 5th run from point to point. His 5th run from the restaurant into the city square in Prague with the water. Fish. Great stunt, though. Such a good stunt.
So I had texted you that Rotten Tomatoes had done the research for us on this.
Yes. God bless him. Let me see if I can get the authors. Mark Hoffmeyer. God bless you.
And Mark did a good work. This was before Mission Impossible Fallout came out. But he wrote an article for Rotten Tomatoes analyzing the box office success of Tom Cruise's movies with the amount of running he does in number of feet, and found some correlation, humorously enough, that the more feet he runs, the better his movies do. And in this movie, Mission Impossible, Tom Cruise runs for 730 feet. So we're going to keep a running tally as we go through these movies of how many feet he runs in each movie.
730 feet, which is actually pretty low for his standard. Is that correct?
It's on the high. It's actually on the higher side, but he certainly has movies where he's more he's got more prolific running stats.
Yes. I feel like he had short sprints throughout this movie, short running sprints. So he goes back to the safe house. He's freaking out. It's great. Tom Cruise. It's a great character for Tom Cruise. He's panicking. He's a young guy. Then
his team is dead.
His team's dead. He's panicking. It's so good. And then he figures out that I kind of got lost here, but essentially there is my
favorite part of this scene is, I don't know if you caught this, but so now he's sitting in front of the laptop and he's trying to put the pieces together, right? Because he's right? And so he's at least got a laptop. So here he types into the computer internet access.
Yes.
He types in to the computer as a command internet access.
It's like Googling Google. It's like I'm Googling Google so I can get on Google homepage.
So he also does a thing here. He notices that there's a Bible behind the computer. He's trying to piece these things together, right? So, but he also has a gun.
Kittredge said job 314, which is his clue.
So yeah, he's trying to figure what that means or whatever. But I think it's humorous here that he picks up the Bible off of the book stand and realizes it's not Job, it's Job. So he starts looking for the Bible reference Job 3:14. So he's got this Bible, and so his work setup he's got a Bible on his left, a computer in the center, and a gun on the right. And I just think that that's so funny. This like juxtaposition of these three items. He's got a Bible and a gun. And really, what else does Tom Cruise need?
He doesn't need much. You could be at every home in Southwest Alabama, honestly. But what do you think? So he's searching for this, Book of Job discussion group. Let's talk about the Book of Job discussion group. What are they discussing in the Book of Job discussion group in your mind?
I mean, despair. Yeah, I just actually, just finished reading Job myself.
Ironically,
like I just finished it. I spent 2 weeks reading it and I finished it just the other day.
It's definitely an on the nose reference because if you know much about the Book of Job, or, if not, please join the Book of Job discussion group.
Right, yeah.
It is definitely a passage of sacred text that is about lament. It's about struggle. It's about pain. It's about confusion. It's about authority. It's about losing the things that you have. So it's very connected with the whole franchise. It's a little on the nose if you know a little bit about the Book of Job, but it's fun. And I think what's interesting is that he does email every single member of the Book of Job, which
yes,
I felt like this whole sequence, and maybe I'll make a little bit for our Instagram at Luke H. Ferris, TikTok at Least Important Things, I feel like it captured the work from home corporate mindset of like, you're literally falling asleep as you're writing emails and waiting for people to respond. It's like, that's what it is.
Yes.
Outside of the gun and maybe the Bible, but it definitely felt like a very work from home.
It really did. It really did. I just love that the email address that he sent to, like, we know what email addresses are. They're so common to us. In 1996, not many people used email, or certainly far, far fewer. And the email address that he's sending to is max@job314, as if like that's going to land, like that 100% of the time comes back undeliverable.
I feel like we need to see if that, like, we can get that email. We probably should try it out. We need to make that the email for the miniseries. Also, couldn't have he just done like a CC everybody?
I didn't even think about that. Yeah, or a BCC because he doesn't want everyone to know.
Yeah, right. He should have done a BCC everybody, and that would have solved it. He literally could have done that in 2 minutes, and it would have solved all his problems.
What if he had like to recall the message? Like, what is recalling emails in 1996 in the Book of Job discussion group?
But you know what? We have to give him credit because, like, as much as Ethan Hunt is a master spy, he's probably not apt in email etiquette at this point in the history. So to keep moving, we got to keep this train going until we get to the actual train. Claire comes back. Ethan suspects her. This whole scene is like, it's very weird. When my wife was quote unquote watching in the background, she was like, wow, this is getting intense. And I was like, well, we didn't know this, but they were supposed to be lovers in this triangle. And again, it's hinted at throughout the movie, but it's not as clear as like most movies. Like they almost kiss in this scene, but they don't. It's well acted. It's just ironic to me. So then basically what happens is Claire and Ethan are like, okay, let's figure this out. Let's try to see who the mole is. They get a buyer in London, who's a great character. She's basically going to buy the list. And she has these long-haired guys as her like minions.
This is jumping ahead just slightly, but Ethan finds out that this list, he finds out what the price that she was willing to pay for this list. I think it's $6 million. And frankly, $6 million for a list of every agent in Eastern Europe and their identities, tremendous deal.
It's a great deal.
If you can strike that deal, I think it's a great price for her.
I'd take that deal any day of the week. She's a great businesswoman. So she's figuring it out. And I love her character. I wish they would bring her back. I think they will bring her back in a different way. Her type of character
is okay. Her type of character. Okay.
Just wait for that type of character to come back. Because to no one's surprise, the big part of Mission Impossible is Ethan being, I forget the term, extradited or blacklisted from INF. Like this will happen more than once throughout his career.
Oh yeah. It's the norm. It's a Tuesday.
It's a Tuesday. This is going to happen all the time. And essentially what happens is Ethan, he basically promises to deliver this. And you know what I love about this? Because a lot of spy movies, they move past the financials. This is all setting up that he needs the money to hire a team to get the job done. She's investing into his scheme, essentially.
Yeah. So to your point about her type of character coming back, do you not think that Solomon Lane is that type of character? I mean, he's like an arms dealer, kind of like a sociopathic terrorist.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I think they lean into that character more in the later movies as kind of the middleman.
Oh, are you saying
black market
to the listeners? Do you think this type of character is going to come back, or were you telling me that you think this type of character is going to come back?
No, I was saying to the listeners. I was saying,
I'm so sorry.
Mike was like, "Luke, I think that actually is true."
Here I am.
I think it's actually true.
I'm playing active defense against this podcast.
I know. It's good. We got to get our sea legs. It's been a while. We're coming back from retirement. Okay, let's move on to getting the team together. What do you make of this first, outside of the team that was killed? Disavowed is the word, by the way. Ethan gets our disavowed team members. It's a small team compared to other Mission Impossible movies. It's really 4 people. It is Ving Rhames as Luther, and then Jean Reno, who from he's and previously he had done The Professional, or Leon the Professional. With Natalie Portman. So again, both 2 guys that had been in the zeitgeist in more indie films. Ving Rhames, of course, was in Pulp Fiction before this. So 2 guys that were not huge stars, but both in big, successful indie movies.
I think something that people probably think, like, I would say the greater public at large, Ving Rhames to them is kind of like somebody whose career only exists in the Mission Impossible movies. But I would posit to those people to just look at his filmography, because this man is a prolific working actor. He is everywhere. Of course he has a big role in the Mission Impossible movies, but he is not, just living off of the paychecks from Mission Impossible, although he probably could, but he really is like a very, very successful actor who's got many jobs.
Yeah, he's done so much. Both of these guys are great journeyman actors, character actors, but they both at the time were recognizable. And again, they weren't too dissimilar. They weren't like way out of the realms of those previous characters they were known for, but they bring a texture and I guess they when we think about teams, and we'll again look out for this as we bring the teams together in Mission Impossible. You'll see these type of actors that maybe have a couple credits that are well known, but bring a lot of energy to the story. And of course, Luther as a character, and we'll maybe talk about this, is there's a moment after the famous CIA Pentagon caper that to me is the moment of the franchise. So what are they going to do, Mike? They're going to go to Langley and try to steal
the Declaration of Independence.
The Declaration of Independence, also known as the knock list. This to me is probably, if not the greatest, but one of the greatest caper scenarios in all of cinema.
Yes, agreed. 100%. The way they set this up and the types of challenges and hurdles and roadblocks and systems that are in place that make this difficult. I mean, it's just one of the best thought out devices in film. Like the amount of craftiness that Ethan and his team have to use in order to get this, frankly, is kind of impressive. And there's reasons to be critical of this. I mean, obviously they have to succeed. So there are plot holes or not plot holes, but there are holes that you can poke through and say, well, that would never be the case. Well, none of this really would ever be the case. So, I'm always really impressed with this. I feel like every time I watch this movie, they get to the point where they are explaining this in the difficulty level. And every time I think, I don't know how they're going to do it.
No. It's like, and in the scenes, they say that like, this is impossible, but it's why, like, specifically Luther, it's why he wants to do it. Cause to him, it's the challenge that gets him excited. Which is him and Ethan as a character duo. It's the boldness and craziness of Ethan and the professionalism and the desire to achieve and be the best of Luther that make them such a dynamic team. I think this is the beginning of the tropes that we'll see throughout the franchise of, yes, this plot is crazy. Yes, them, fire department getting in, the whole thing, it's wild, but it's great cinema. And it's the reason why these movies are so fun to watch is because they clearly outline the stakes. It's very specific about like what's going to happen. Well, temperature, noise, all these things that make it very, very difficult to make this mission impossible. It's outlined in a very exciting way as a viewer, and you know what it's at stake. You know the tension. They're in the CIA headquarters. I mean, this is as real as it gets. I love that it's in the building where Kittredge is. So it's like it's even more exciting. The guy who plays I don't know what his actual title is, but the IT guy, yeah. He is. It's like a Rowan Atkinson level. He's the perfect
bureaucrat.
Yeah, it's like a Rowan Atkinson level of performance where he has literally almost no lines, barely lines, and he's showcasing everything. The one moment where it took me out of it was, and maybe it fits because he's a bureaucrat, not to stereotype, he's an IT guy, he's a nerd, was that Claire sits down next to him in the break room. She sits right next to him and he doesn't even notice her. That was the one time I was like, this beautiful woman's literally sitting right next to you and you don't even notice her. In a red dress,
he clearly has beautiful women sit next to him all the time at work.
I guess. I just think that whatever he was reading in the Washington Post must have been riveting for him to just be totally out of it. So the guys get in. They get in through being firemen.
Yeah.
Tom Cruise, Ethan stops Eugene or Franz from killing one of the guards. That'll set us up later on. And then essentially what they do is they make our beautiful, kind IT guy, they make him sick. So he is able to get into the facility.
What do you think that she puts in his drink? Like,
it's like some high concentrated, I don't know, something, or just
something
like
that makes you throw up at least 3 times. I'm just trying to think about like what that would be.
It must be like really old oyster water brine or oyster brine, like some seafood brine that's been like sitting in a plastic container for 8 days.
Here I am thinking of like really practical things. Like she put like rubbing alcohol in there, and you're like, no. They went and they got oysters at a Joe's Crab Shack, and then like left it out for a little bit. Left it in
the back of the van for a while. Well, because it was in the coffee, and the coffee would cover the bitterness of that, and just like. I felt for him because like I got food poisoning last year from yogurt, and it was very much the same feeling that he had running to the bathroom. So this scene where Tom Cruise, this is again, I wouldn't say this is a impressive physical, like insane stunt, but his stunt of him going down. I love that they cut the music. It's super quiet.
Yes.
He's elevated over the computer. Again, floppy disks, trying to get the data, the sweat, the craziness of like the mouse coming in.
Yeah.
I mean, that as well. Again, it's another character cue because he kills the mouse with his knife. So we know that Franz is a killer. And they do this subtly in this whole sequence. They're like, Franz is a killer, and it sets up the whole idea that he's actually a bad guy.
Yeah. I have a question here about costume.
Yes.
So this is the first time in the movie Ethan wears glasses. So
yes.
Why? If it was so important that nothing be dropped.
It's the Google glasses. So Wynne Rhymes can see him. So Luther can watch him. Yeah, I thought the same thing, and then I realized it was when they cut to it. Like you can see there.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a hot look, but it's it's just like, why is he wearing glasses?
The whole time I was just thinking, like, if it's so important not to drop anything, why does he need? But it totally makes sense. I've neglected to remember that detail.
Ving Rhymes, like we talked about this, his quietness of him talking through the scene is not practical.
No,
it doesn't really make sense. Like he's not loud enough to set off the trigger, but it builds the tension because it's telling us as an audience, you're supposed to be quiet.
Yeah, this really is a good scene. And I think an underappreciated part of this heist is one of the details is that temperature change in the room can set off the alarm. And they are very clever in that they lower Tom Cruise into the vault. And then just before the temperature hits the mark where the trigger would go off, this guy walks back into the vault, and then that kind of resets the system. And so once that guy leaves, the air conditioner is just supposed to regulate the temperature with Tom Cruise's body in it. So now the temperature is not even a part of their plan. It's just very clever, like heist design planning. Like, hey, once we're in the room, we don't have to worry about the temperature anymore because it'll regulate based on Tom Cruise's body temperature.
I never even realized that.
Yeah.
That's actually brilliant. That makes it even more brilliant. That's so cool. But the water is the big problem with this.
Yeah.
It's Franz drops him. There's that tension of him waving around. I mean, it's such a great sequence. It's so tense inducing. But essentially he gets out. He gets the file. He gets the floppy disk. one of my favorite things in here that feels very accurate is that when our good friend, our good company man comes back, he logs in and he sees that someone has downloaded the file, which is very accurate. If someone, like, if you're on your MacBook and you download something, like, you can see that it's been downloaded. Yeah. And I think it's a very, like, yeah, he would know that somebody went in there. But they get away in the fire truck. I love the line that Kittredge says. He says, like, send him into Alaska or something like that. Like, I want him in Alaska tomorrow.
I want him,
And he says, just mail him his clothes. I'm like, oh, it's brutal.
It's so good.
It's just absolutely brutal. We have Ethan Hunt doing magic, sleight of hand magic. Yes. Again, teasing the idea that Franz is kind of gunning for the information. Then I think, again, I mentioned this earlier, probably the most important sequence, I think, of the entire franchise. I'm going to say one of the most important things of the entire franchise. Ethan has he has two floppy disks. One has the necklace, one doesn't. And he's playing this cat and mouse game with Franz. Afterwards, he goes into the trash can. Luther's like, oh, Franz had the actual list the whole time. And they talk about it, and Ethan gives Luther the list. So there's this trust build, this idea that Luther knows the importance of it. We see it earlier in the scene where he's like, oh, it's the knock list. And Ethan says, it's because I knew you were like, you were scared about that. You knew the significance of it.
Yeah. Well, he's a disavowed agent. He probably still has, I don't know if agents have friends, but I imagine that he has old friends or people he knows that are still in the field, that this would be life or death if this ever got out in the open. Right.
I never even thought about that. Like his old buddies could be in danger.
Yep.
He knows the power of it. And that, to me right there, that trust. And Luther's kind of taken aback, like, wow, you give it to me? And they do a little like bit there with Luther doing the sleight of hand. But to me, that is the foundational of their relationship, those two characters, throughout the entire franchise. It's such an important moment. Ethan sees on the TV that his mom and uncle are being framed essentially for running drugs in Pennsylvania. Another thing I forgot to mention, when he's having dinner with Kittredge in Prague, Kittredge talks about his dad being sick and all this backstory of the family farm. I didn't remember that. It's something to be aware of when we think about Ethan Hunt as a character, that he's got a family. Like, he's taking all these risks, but he's got a family. I can't tell if his dad's dead or dying, but just something for us to watch as we move on. Yeah. Then he again sees his mom and uncle at the TV. He calls Kittredge in London, just kind of as a ploy. And then we see that Jim Phelps has resurrected from the grave. John Voight in a nice trench coat. They have a nice scene at like a kind of like a little tea house in London. I thought this was interesting, that essentially what the movie does is that Jim knows he's betraying Ethan, but he doesn't think Ethan knows.
Right.
Us as viewers, we don't know if Ethan knows that he was the actual mole, but we are shown that Jim actually did it, how he did it in Prague, how he betrayed the team.
Oh, I disagree. I think what we're seeing is what Ethan is putting together in his head.
Oh,
because he keeps talking through about, but he keeps talking through it. But his conversation with Jim, he is talking as if Kittredge is the one that's doing it. And so he's like basically talking with Jim saying, oh, and then Kittredge is this. And then at the end, he says, well, I don't know how he would have killed so-and-so in the car. He must have had a second person alluding to Claire. And then because he doesn't know if that's the big thing is he doesn't know that Claire is in on it or if she is. And he's like, oh no, he could have done that himself. And so Ethan is revealing to the audience that I know who did this. But Jim,
I didn't catch
Jim
that.
Doesn't know. Jim doesn't
Ethan knows.
know. Yes. Because Ethan says that later on. He says, I knew before London. So before that, he met him at the telephone booth, but not until after he saw the Bible from the Drake Hotel.
Yes, the Bible at the Drake Hotel was a clue. So Ethan did already know. Okay, thanks for explaining that to me because I was a little confused, but it makes more sense the way Tom Cruise acted as he's like trying to fool Jim. I thought there was a great line when Jim's talking about Kittredge because they're saying Kittredge is the mole, and he's talking about the Cold War and that you're not needed anymore. And it's Jim projecting. We're learning why he's doing this. The idea is that the MIF is not important anymore. He was a product of the Cold War. And this hints back to the television show of like, it's connected to the show because it's the idea of like, where's Jim Phelps in the 90s from the TV show? Well, his team's not needed anymore. The IMF is not being funded, all these things. It was a big reason why when this first movie came out, it was super successful, but there was a core of the Mission Impossible television show fans that did not like this because essentially you made Jim Phelps, who was the main character of the television show, the villain. But I think it's very clever if you follow the timeline of like from the Cold War to the 90s, like this would be a bitter old bureaucrat that didn't feel valued anymore and was just trying to get his. They have this scene, and this sets up essentially what is the final sequence on the train. So Ethan is going to deliver the goods to the buyer. They're on the train. As an audience member, we don't know where Ethan is. And essentially, the camera shows that we're supposed to think it's Jim Phelps. Luther's there. He's bugging the internet upload. Apparently, he's messing with the Wi-Fi. Luther, you should have just had Comcast be part of this, and that would have just solved all your problems. Just have a conglomerate internet provider and blame it on them. AOL, whatever it is. They're trying to upload basically the file so they have it. And then we get the big reveal. Hunt uses the mask. That's the fourth mask. So let's follow that. Let's keep a track on that. It's the fourth mask reveal. Ethan is dressed up as Jim. He reveals it to Claire. He finally figures out that Claire is on Jim's side. Again, this would probably be more emotional if they were lovers. It's implied that they're lovers. Jim implies it, but right. It's not as clear. It's clear when you know about it, but it's not as clear. And then we get the train.
This movie is not that long, so no, it's weird. It
might be one of the shorter of all of them.
And part of that is it came out in 96, right? Movies have gotten longer since then, but it is odd that they, I don't know, cut 5 minutes to do that. The movie didn't really suffer because of it. It's still a widely popular movie. It's still a great movie. But it could have been that much better for 5 minutes.
I think they could have added it, but I understand why they cut it. We get because like there's this moment where like Ethan's very sorrowful because Jim shoots her, and it's like, okay, why does he care about her? We get the final sequence on the train. This is really the only big CGI shot. It feels dated when you're watching it, but the cool thing is, so when they film this, it's obviously green screen focus, but the wind is not. So Tom Cruise this is the beginning kind of origin story of Tom Cruise trying to push the limits. He brought in like those huge wind machines that are used on cars, are used for, I don't know if you've ever done this, Mike, but it's essentially you can do skydiving inside. It's those skydiving machines. I haven't done it,
but I know it. Yeah.
he essentially used one of those to get the accurate wind action of a bullet train going through France, which it adds to the element, even though it is CGI focused in the background and it has aged. The wind action, I think, keeps that tension alive. The helicopters tracking them. It seems like a stupid exit plan, but I love that the gum comes back.
Red light.
Red light. And then he uses the gum to blow up the helicopter. Ethan uses like the explosion to jump onto the train in a great shot. It's aged a little bit with CGI, but like I remember that
it's being the most used. Mission Impossible 2 part of the film.
Yeah, and it's used a lot in like Mission Impossible advertisements. I remember that being in the trailer. It's a great shot. And the helicopter explodes. It falls towards the train, and the blades barely cuts his throat. This is the most dramatic part of the movie. That's feels very Mission Impossible in the future. Yeah. In the future movies.
Also, shout out to whatever company made the windshield wipers for that train, because man, can those things take a beating.
They were really taking a beating. We learned that Ethan was working with Kittredge. They're able to get the buyer to nab the buyer, and all is well. Ethan and Luther have a great moment. They're sharing a pint and talking about it. Essentially, this is setting up the idea that they could work together in the future. Just love these guys. This bromance is one of the best bromance in cinema.
I agree. Yeah, it's one of those things whenever a Mission Impossible movie comes out, and Benji, when he comes into the movie,
it gets even better. It gets
even better. But
it's so much love. Ethan has exonerated himself. He is flying home to America on British Airways, and we get the call back that we started with Jim with the cassette giving him his mission. The Super Nintendo cartridge. He did have to blow it when he put it in the file, and then he gets his mission. And then we cut to the theme that's not used a ton, but is a fantastic theme, and that is the end of the first Mission Impossible. Mike, what are your thoughts about it? The first movie, rewatching it, and then let's think of a rating system.
Oh, I still really like this movie. I think that obviously it's dated now for some things. That obviously the technology, right? It's a spy movie, so those kinds of things age. But I think instead of aging and being instead of that not being fun, I think it adds a lot of charm and like intrigue. And it's kind of something like, at least for my generation, you look at and you're like, oh my gosh, like the old tech, that's really neat. And so yeah, I still really love this movie. It's still one of my favorites. I think it's also, like you said at the beginning, it's a great TV movie. This is we talked about Jurassic Park 3 being one of the all-time great TV movies because it's tight. It's quick, it's fast paced. This movie is similar in some ways. It doesn't leave, there's not a lot of fat.
No, it's tight. The whole movie's really tight. It's really easy to watch. There's no part where you're like kind of drifting or it feels pushed. I agree. It's the age stuff that catches up with it. But to me, some of these sequences are some of the best spy sequences and are used in spy movies in the future. I even think about like The Bourne Identity, which was a revolutionary spy series. They pull from some of this confusion, some of the tension that Mission Impossible brings up here that De Palma used, that De Palma's so great at using. The Prague sequences, I think the caper sequence in this is unrivaled, unparalleled, and it just begins the foundation of this franchise. So we're going to use masks as our ranking system. So we're going to have 5 masks, 5 masks being the best, 1 mask being the worst. how would you rate this first one? Again, this is going to set the tone, so we might have to do a re-ranking. But what would you rate it?
We'll have to do a re-ranking for sure. But I'm giving this 4 out of 5 masks.
I'm going to say the same. I think 4 out of 5 masks. I think this, because this sets the tone of the franchise and this sets a lot of the tropes. Again, giving credit to the television show that set a lot of the foundations of this, but this sets the tropes that we will see throughout the franchise. And I think 4 out of 5, even with some of the outdated, the final sequence with the CGI, that's a little bit outdated, the technology, but it's such a great film. It's tense. It's such a great spy film.
I feel like that point about the outdated CGI, I mean, it really is a mystery movie, right? And I feel like the mystery covers up some of those cinema sins, if you will.
Yeah, because the mystery is what drives it. And the idea that it's a team leader. I also think this is a bold movie for the time, because think of the all the different franchise reboots that have happened in the last 10 years, and they would make one of the main characters from the original foundational franchise the villain. It's a pretty bold movie. It would be like if they, for the most recent Scream, if they made Dewey the villain. They teased that, but they never did it. Like actually making Dewey Ghostface, that would be crazy.
That would be.
I feel that was the first one that came to mind. That was the first one that came to mind.
I was trying to think about like one of the superhero movies that we have these days, but those characters are kind of immortalized in a way. There's not really. I guess it would be like.
It would be like if you made a Magnum PI movie and you made Magnum like a really dark, like you made him a really dark character. You made the guy who's the butler in that show like the villain. Or it's kind of like with Scooby-Doo, the 2002 Scooby-Doo, where they made Scrappy-Doo the villain. Do you remember that?
No, I never saw that, because the Scooby-Doo movies, it was the one bad.
They're terrible. But it was either the first one or the second one, and they made Scrappy-Doo the villain, and I hated it. I was like, I'm out. That's what I'm sure some fans felt like. But to me, the bold moves worked, and it set up this franchise for 2+ decades of cinema mastery. But next up, Mission Impossible 2. Which is very different from the film we just watched.
But in a lot of reasons, I mean, it has a lot of reasons why it's different, but
I'm excited. Yeah. Well, Mike, any final words before we light this match and self-destruct? I think we've already self-destructed probably.
Yeah, certainly. No, I'm excited to see the rest of the movies. I'm excited for the new one to come out this summer. So, yeah.
And Mission Impossible 2, John Woo. Least Important Things is a podcast about the most important of the least important things in pop culture and entertainment. You can be part of the show by leaving a voicemail at www.speakpipe.com/leastimportantthings or visiting our website at leastimportantthings.com and clicking the Leave a Voicemail button. You can email the show at leastimportantthings@gmail.com or reach out to me on Instagram or Twitter at Luke H. Ferris or Least Important Things on Facebook. Thanks for listening, and until next time, I'll talk to you soon.